All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours, Episode 8. Office Hours, where we answer questions, give philosophical perspectives, formulate and explore arguments, and deep dive into particular topics of your choice. Jay writes, what was Marx wrong about in regards to class? Was he, Marx, right about anything? Now, I like this question because it gives me an opportunity to talk about some of the value that philosophy can bring to how we interact with questions in the world generally. Because philosophy is kind of about asking questions, as Roger Scruton once said. And it's a lot about not just asking questions, but figuring out what the correct question is. Was Marx wrong about class? Is maybe not the right question. And we'll get into that in a little bit. So it's first worth pointing out that class predates Marx. Like ideas of class and class resentment. There were fears about slave revolts. Basically through time immemorial. Class envy and class conflict, even to some degree, has been a part of society going in most societies. Even it was very common in, for example, Rome, for senators to try to stoke class resentment against the aristocrats. There was a particularly famous uprising. I forget the guy who led it. My Roman historian nerd friends will be beating me for forgetting this one. It was famous for being the one that Cicero put down. And it was sort of a forerunner to Julius Caesar's rise to power. That was about it sort of centered and revolved around a land redistribution program that would have benefited poorer landowners at the expense of like wealthy aristocrats. So anyways, ideas of class have gone back for a long time. If Marx didn't invent class distinctions, and we can keep India, we don't even need to bring India up. If he didn't invent class distinctions or the idea of class conflict, what exactly did he assert? What was his claim about class? Well, Marx's class theory is basically an application of Hegelian dialectic to how Marx thought history would progress. Now, the difference, of course, between Hegel and Marx is that Hegel was all about spirit. It was all about the phenomenology of spirit. And he thought that it was these ideas that guided history. Marx said, no, that's all backwards. It's our material conditions will determine what people think. So it's actually kind of, economics isn't quite the right phrase, but it's like economics and other material conditions that shape our social views and our religious or spiritual views on our ideas that we want to have. Maybe that says something about Marx. If he's, maybe it was his. Yeah, we'll get into that in a little bit. So Marx famously flipped Hegel on his head, as he put it, and said, we're still doing this dialectic process where a thesis generates an antithesis, and there's some conflict and a synthesis emerges. I'm probably getting my dialectics mixed up. There's like a Kantian dialectic, and then there's a Hegelian dialectic, which is different, but it's the same process. It's this a current state of things generates its own counter movement, and then the result of these two clashing creates a new state of affairs. And the idea is that this process has a predictable logic to it. So you can see where the end of history is. For Hegel, this was the universe becoming God becoming conscious of himself as God, which sounds Christian and is very much not. For Marx, it was the simplified, maybe oversimplified answer is the end of history is communism. But it's in many ways a lot closer to Hegel than that, because communism is just the expression of the desired end in the political state of affairs. Communism is a byproduct of the true desired end. What is that? Well, let's get to that in a bit. First, let's go back to the class theory. So Marx's class theory in this dialectical materialism was a prediction. Marx's class theory predicted that the dogmas and ideologies of the 18th and 19th century collapsed and moved into the 20th century, class consciousness would emerge as the real identity, and that there would be the lower class, the proletariat, would overthrow the economic upper class, the bourgeoisie. Not because they were oppressed and they should do that. It's not a moral argument. It's a prediction as to what the forces of history do. This is neither good nor bad. It's just what's going to happen. And so the reason for taking the side of the proletariat is not because they're oppressed and therefore we need to take their side for some moral reason. Now, Marx is not against using moralistic language. He will certainly do that for rhetorical reasons, but it's not about that. It's about being on the right side of this dialectical process of history. You want to be on the right side of history. Maybe you've heard that phrase. That's a Hegelian phrase. It presumes there is one endpoint to history. Modern Hegelians and neo-Marxists think that now there's two, actually. That fascism might win. We don't know. That's very scary. But at the time, Orthodox Marxists thought there's one final conclusion, that's communism. You want to be on the right side of history, right? Other Hegelians think neoliberalism is the end point of history. Maybe a conversation for another time. The end of history and the last man and things like that. Regardless, so he believed that the underclass would throw a revolution and overthrow the upper class, and that would transition from capitalism into socialism, and then there might have been some intermediate stage, and then ultimately into communism. And the final endpoint was the abolition of the state entirely, into something like anarcho-communism. You don't even need language to describe these things at that point. It's just organic, humanity as a species being operating in its collective interest, and in peace and harmony with itself. Basically, that was the view of the long-term trajectory of that. Now, as a prediction, that was falsified. It was just completely didn't come true. And this was actually a bit of a crisis for Marxist scholars in the 20th century. They had a real reckoning, and they're like, oh God, how do we explain this? Some of them abandoned Marxism entirely because they saw the falsification. And there's basically no orthodox Marxists anymore. There's no serious ones anyways. No one who is a pure dialectical materialist in the old school Marxist way. However, there are a whole lot of neo-Marxists out there who have held on to the essence of Marxism, even though they've abandoned the general economic theory. So if Marx's social and economic predictions didn't come true, why do neo-Marxists still exist? Well, they still exist because neo-Marxists are holding on to the spirit of Marxism, which was never about economics or social class in the first place. It was never about that. So, what is Marxism? What is it really about? I want to read some quotes from some excerpts from Marx's writings spanning from 1841 to 1844. These are To Make the World Philosophical. I believe he was 22 when he wrote 23 when he wrote that. And For a Ruthless Criticism of Everything Existing, maybe a telling title, 1844. And perhaps his most the most important document to read, more important than the Communist Manifesto. You don't need to worry about the Communist Manifesto. You certainly don't need to worry about Das Kapital. The crucial bit of writing to understand Marx is just the introduction, really, but I mean the whole thing is the contribution to the critique of Hegel's philosophy of right, also from 1844. I want to read some excerpts from these and see if anything comes into view for you as you listen. So first is from To Make the World Philosophical, which emphasizes the opposition between philosophy and the world of appearances. Very old concept, but it also uplifts Prometheus for his rebellion against the existing order. And the quote is, it is a psychological law that the theoretical mind, once liberated in itself, turns into practical energy and, leaving the shadowy empire of Amanthes as will, turns itself against the reality of the world existing without it. End quote. This is really, I think, it shows the beginning of the path that he's going down. Now, people write all kinds of things in their mid-20s. Maybe he changes his mind later on. Maybe he goes back on it, perhaps. So let me jump down 3 years to For a Ruthless Criticism of Everything Existing, which is basically talking about how an analysis is a deconstructive force that can free humanity from the constraints of dogma. And he's trying to say, we're not trying to replace their dogma with another dogma that's the truth, like all these other dogmatists. We're just trying to basically hold a mirror up to them and make them see what they really are clearly, and then we can move forward from there. That's his idea. And he says, quote, "We only show the world what it is fighting for, and consciousness is something that the world must acquire, like it or not." End quote. Now, the invocation of the idea of consciousness is very important. Perhaps you've heard the phrase false consciousness. That's basically anybody who is attached to a dogma or to an ideology in a Marxist view of things. Becomes kind of ironic if you view Marxism as an ideology, but they view that as sort of not ideological by definition for special pleading reasons. And again, this is a subject that I would encourage people to look into the work of James Lindsay about. I think he is about 90% right on all of this stuff, and the 10% doesn't matter that much to get a real grasp of what's going on here. But the point of this essay, which is actually a true point, I think, is that true clarity and objectivity in the view of how things are is an essentially destructive force, and we should pursue it. So it's worth bearing in mind, what are the assumptions here? If he can see that clarity in objectivity is essentially destructive, I think for many people that would give cause to question the value of objectivity, which was the case with myself. He goes a different route. He says, no, that means it's important to then destroy these things. So let me jump now to the quotes from his contribution to the critique of Hegel's philosophy of right, also 1844. And I have 3 quotes I want to read from this, because this is a very important paper. He says, quote, and this is preceded by a beautiful quote about religion and the nature of religion, which is often sort of misquoted. This is where he says religion is the opium of the masses. The full quote is like, religion is a sigh of the oppressed creature. It's the heart of a heartless world. It's an opium for the people, and the call for the abolition of religion is not the call to have these people suffer in their naked chains, but to pluck the flower from the chains so that they can see the chains and break the chains to cull the living flower, or something to that effect. I didn't write it down, but it's a very memorable line. It's a very poetic line, very beautiful line, which doesn't necessarily make it true. It's an important distinction between beauty and truth that some people who get too enamored with Keats, beauty is truth, truth is beauty, that is all you need to know. Complete bullshit. But anyways, a tangent. He says, Marx says, the criticism of religion disillusions man, so that he will think, act, and fashion his reality like a man who has discarded his illusions and regained his senses, so that he will move around himself as his own true sun. Religion is only the illusory sun, which revolves around man, as long as he does not revolve around himself. Look at that language there. End quote, I should say. Look at that language. We're talking about the sun, about man revolving around himself as his own true sun. This is a call to become God. This is a religious text, or at the very least a spiritual and philosophical text. Where are we seeing class here? Where are we seeing economics here? Another quote. In the struggle against that state of affairs, and here we're shifting topic slightly. In the struggle against that state of affairs, criticism is no passion of the head, it is the head of passion. It is not a lancet, it is a weapon. Its object is its enemy, which it wants not to refute, but to exterminate. For the spirit of that state of affairs is refuted. In itself, it is no object worthy of thought. It is an existence which is as despicable as it is despised. Criticism does not need to make things clear to itself as regards this object, for it has already settled accounts with it. It is no longer assumed the quality of an end in itself, but only of a means. Its essential pathos is indignation. Its essential work is denunciation. End quote. So what he's saying there is that, criticism is not part of some philosophical process to, get to the truth. He says, no, we've already seen that. We have the truth. We possess the knowledge. We can clearly see what's real here. The purpose of criticism is not to fish out the truth in this conversation. It's to destroy the object of criticism. It's to demolish it. And we're going to use criticism to change things, not to engage in philosophical dialogue, but to break things. And now, in this context, he's specifically talking about the current political state of affairs in Germany, but I think you can see very easily how the idea applies more broadly when we set it against the first quote and when we set it against the third quote here, which is, quote, the weapon of criticism cannot, of course, replace criticism of the weapon. Material force must be overthrown by material force, but theory also becomes a material force as soon as it has gripped the masses. Theory is capable of gripping the masses as soon as it demonstrates ad hominem, and it demonstrates ad hominem, against the man, as soon as it becomes radical. To be radical is to grasp the root of the matter, but for man, the root is man himself. End quote. There's nothing about class or economics in this. It's not about that. The point is this, and this is like the heart of Marxism. Criticism is the means of clarifying the absurdities of all ideologies which have enslaved the consciousness of mankind. These dogmas constrain men by expressing themselves in material conditions, which then, affect men's minds. So Marx seeks to free man as a species being, not an individual man, but man in the capital M broad collective sense, by changing the material conditions in such a way that will change men's consciousness. But he will do this through criticism. He will affect the material conditions by criticizing material conditions. So, in a very real way, Marxism isn't even about the material conditions. It talks a lot about that because that's its vector of attack. That's its mechanism for affecting the change it wants to create in the world. But those are a means to an end. And what it says in pursuit of that end may or may not be true. You can certainly employ factually true statements about class, which is a very effective divisive power in Europe, a little bit less so in the United States. Neo-Marxists had to pick a different subject to go after in the United States. They switched from class to race, and that's worked out very well for them. To a degree, gender as well. So, to summarize it, Marxism is a doctrine of freedom of the mind by rebellion against all constraints. That's what it's at. Well, that's what it's about at its heart. That's its essential character, as you can see in the earliest texts. And criticism of current states of affairs in class or economics is simply a means of pursuing this religious and philosophical end, this view of man as a worker, which is not a mere laborer, but someone who can envision things in his mind and bring them into the world materially. That's a religious act in Marxism, and it's a beautiful act in their view. And on that point, I'm not even sure I would disagree with them, but we might disagree about if that is, what the essential nature of man is in relation to this, and if, ideologies or other ideas are truly constraints or not. You can see the dovetailing of this into the previous video about transgenderism, perhaps, and inherited identities, which within Marxism are not just functionally oppressive, but oppressive by definition. Because if you are inheriting some ideology or some identity, you are not revolving around your own sun. You are not self-created, and therefore are a slave. You are not free until you have created yourself, is the idea. So, was Marx right about class? Was he right about anything? Was Marx right is kind of the wrong question when applied to economics or social forces. Now, in those cases, he used very real observations, and he was doubtless right about many specific facts, even though he was broadly wrong in his predictions, which were probably less predictions and attempts at creating self-fulfilling prophecies. That's probably what they were. Even the argument, and this was the thing that kind of got me a year ago. I realized, because I'd been saying, oh, like Marxism doesn't get human nature. That actually doesn't grasp the point. Marxists are very well aware that their theory doesn't describe human nature as it is now. They're trying to change that. And they're pretty sure they can. And, I mean, when you look around, you can certainly see that they have changed things. I don't know if they're getting the results they exactly want, but they certainly can change people, and make them physically unable to tolerate the status quo. This is what Herbert Marcuse called a biological foundation for socialism, with a question mark. He was basically talking about inducing mental illness, essentially. Just bombarding people with priming to make the evil capitalist world physically intolerable to people, and so then change would have to happen, because they were running into the problem that they discovered capitalism works. It actually does make people happy. So how can we make them unhappy, basically, so they won't be one-dimensional men, as Marcuse would say. So they see Marxism is not about being factually correct. Facts are just kinds of means to ends. Whether they have the economic or social data right, it's probably more. They probably say, "Yeah, we're more persuasive when we get that right." But it's not about that. It's not about human nature grasping that. We're trying to change that. Factuality was never the point. The real question is not, was Marx right about these material questions? It's, is Marx right about human consciousness and freedom? The things that the neo-Marxists are still holding on to. Is our consciousness and self-consciousness truly essential, critical, species defining, and indeed maybe the only defining features of man, as apart from beast and apart from sad, enslaved, religious lowercase man? Is that true? And is freedom in this regard truly this end in itself? Now, anyone who heard my last video already knows my opinion on this. I think identity is something that we inherit. We are flung into existence, and that's not a cause to take issue with existence. That's a cause to accept what you are, and to accept your being, and to find the power that comes with that acceptance. As paradoxical as that might sound, this is like being Bruce Lee. Be like water, not in relation to an opponent, but in relation to life in general. Whereas Marx is more like, no, be the raging fighter that finds your independence and your individuation in your rebellion against existence. That's how you separate yourself. That's how you find freedom. And selfhood and identity is in rejection of the world outside of you. Marxism is expressed, and again, this is a surprise, I think, to a lot of people, especially people who haven't listened to any of James Lindsay's stuff. If you are not familiar with James Lindsay, this will probably be extremely baffling to most people, because isn't Marx anti-religion? How are you calling him religious? No, Marxism is anti-religious by definition. No, Marxism is against other religions, because those other religions compete with the Marxist theology. Marxism is religious, and I'm not saying that to be critical. I'm personally pro-religion. I think religion is good. I think Marxism is a bad religion. It's not bad because it's a religion. It is a bad religion. It is fundamentally expressed in three spirits, and these spirits have religious character to them. The first, as we already mentioned, is Prometheus, the Titan who rebelled against Zeus, stole the fire of the gods out of a love for mankind. Maybe, so we're told. There's a lot more history behind Prometheus and Zeus that is worth looking into. And Prometheus still strikes a lot of people as very attractive. He's one of those characters that can be very attractive to men in their early 20s. You know, the light bringer, the defiant trickster. It's a very compelling thing to young men. As you begin to get older, you realize, wait, this is really not good. Actually, this is not something to emulate. The second character, spirit, that Marxism is attached to is Thersites from the Iliad, or in Marx's case, from Troilus and Cressida in Shakespeare. Thersites, if you're not aware, well, he's only mentioned in like 2 paragraphs in the Iliad, but he's this profoundly ugly man, and his whole thing is he just rails against people. He mocks people and criticizes people. He mocks Agamemnon, he mocks Odysseus, he mocks Achilles, he mocks Ajax. He's just nonstop criticizing everybody and trying to be funny about it, trying to get a laugh out of them. And in the Iliad, everyone hates him, but they kind of laugh at him with him anyways, even though they dislike him, because they kind of feel the effect he's having. But hey, he tells good jokes until Odysseus literally just beats him over the back with a staff and says basically, "Shut up, or I'm gonna kill you." Don't talk to kings that way, you lowly idiot. And it's a funny point because the Marxist analytic of the Iliad is that Thersites is channeling the feelings of Homer himself, and is speaking truth to power, like, because all his criticisms are true, supposedly. But in my own reading of the Iliad, that can't be correct, because most of Thersites' complaints about Agamemnon are exactly the same as the criticisms made by Achilles. And it's fine when it comes from Achilles. So why is it bad when it comes from Thersites? Is the author, Homer, trying to hide behind the jester's privilege in this character? No, it has to do with hierarchy, the divine order. It has to do with your place. And are you qualified to say these remarks to a king? Achilles is, and Thersites is not. And it's the hierarchy that bothers Marxists. So they'll use Thersites and pretend that Achilles didn't say these things in order to characterize, to put Homer behind Thersites. And they have some other reasons about the way he's described and stuff, but I don't find them particularly compelling. But Thersites is a character that Marx personally connected with, and it came up after someone had said they expected to fight some socialist Hector and found themselves instead against a Thersites, and Marx responded in kind with lines from Troilus and Cressida. The Shakespearean Thersites is a little different than the Homeric Thersites, but it's the same character, and it's the same spirit. And finally, the third spirit, and the most sort of on-the-nose one, and perhaps Marx's personal favorite spirit, was Mephistopheles from Wolfgang von Goethe's Faust. Mephistopheles is basically the devil. He's a demon, but he says, quote, I am the spirit that denies, and justly so, for all things from the void called forth deserve to be destroyed. 'Twere better than were not created. End quote. All that exists deserves to perish. That's the essential spirit of Mephistopheles. He is the embodiment of negation. And all three of these characters, Mephistopheles, Thersites, and Prometheus, express negation through criticism. And they embody the destruction of objectivity. Mephistopheles sort of says it, even. He says, it's not that I want to destroy him, it's that they deserve to be destroyed. So, maybe another way of putting this, another character that embodies this, that people might be more familiar with, who captures the equality that emerges in this negation and in this destruction, is Heath Ledger's Joker from The Dark Knight. When he's confronted Harvey Dent in the hospital after Harvey Dent has had to have his face burned off. And, Harvey Dent puts a gun to Joker's head, and Joker says, oh yeah, you pull the trigger, and they have a conversation about chaos. And Joker says to Harvey, who's about to be Two-Face, he says, you know the thing about chaos? It's fair. It's true. If you destroy everything, break it all down to a fine powder, everything is equal. It's a religious spirit of negation that seeks to negate through criticism. And the ideal of communism, it isn't totally clear how that emerges on the other side of that. I don't know if that was necessary, because if you assume a certain given state of human nature, either generally or one that arises from the material conditions of a given time, either one would have some influence on Karl Marx in his day. And it seems a lot more likely that his end goal was probably less about some utopian ideal and probably a lot more about short-term power and long-term destruction. Because, to borrow from Batman again, some people do just want to see the world burn. I know that's not a very philosophical source quote, but it's a punchy one, and I think it's one that people connect with. And it really does seem to be the case with Marx. Because not only was Mephistopheles his favorite literary character, the line about everything deserving to be destroyed was supposedly his favorite line. So, the real question about Marx is not, is he right? Certainly it's not about, are his economic and social, observations correct? Because undoubtedly many of them are. The real question, and the better question, is his relationship with the world and his attitude toward man and toward existence desirable? That's the better question when we understand what Marxism is, as Marx would say, at the root. And the root is not, economic or social conditions, much as he would like to say that, but is man himself. However, economic and social conditions might condition that or change things. So, anyways, that would be my answer to the question. I hope you found it interesting. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll get back to you soon.